Heidi and I thought a good place to start the Moving Beyond Intractability seminar series would be by explaining why we think that intractable conflict is what we call a climate change class problem. Complex, large-scale, intractable conflict is, we think, a threat to humanity every bit as serious as climate change. In both cases, failure to solve the problem will, over the next several decades, lead to widespread catastrophe. Climate change will severely damage the ecosystem and the societies that depend upon it. Destructive conflict threats are even more wide-ranging. There's obviously the terrible catastrophe of large-scale violence. There's also political tyranny, which commonly arises from divide and conquer strategies used by tyrants to exploit conflict to exert control over a society. There's also the problem of failed revolutions. An inability to deal with conflict effectively can make it impossible for a society to escape the bounds of tyranny. There's also the soft tyranny of plutocracy, where the 1% of the 1% dominates a society, and the threat of fragile and failed states and the anarchy that accompanies them. Even more worrying are perfect storm conflicts in which a wide range of destructive conflict dynamics conspire to produce truly catastrophic confrontations, like the First World War. And finally, and in many ways, maybe this is even more important, destructive conflict dynamics can make it impossible for society to wisely and equitably deal with a wide range of other problems, including climate change, infectious disease, or something that's being called secular stagnation these days, the failure of global economies to provide for the needs of their citizens. So what can we learn from the climate change movement, and what might that have to say about how to deal with these terrible problems? Years ago, when I was just out of graduate school, I had the opportunity to work at the National Center for Atmospheric Research at a time when they were just starting to combine data from sites like Mauna Loa showing alarming increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide with the physics of the greenhouse effect and global observations of climate change as evidenced by things like shrinking glaciers. What's remarkable is that over the next several decades, the people who originally recognized the climate change problem were able to build a global movement of scientists, public policy experts, grassroots citizens capable of calling attention to the problem, the need for action, and putting together concrete options that could really make a difference. In 2007, the peace and conflict community recognized the great accomplishments of this movement by awarding it the Nobel Peace Prize. Among the many things that they were able to do was to put together a large-scale social movement focused on making sacrifices for future generations, for societies that were far too focused on immediate gratification. This was an enormous accomplishment. In addition, they were able to mount a powerful challenge to the carbon fuel industry and promote the creation of a wide range of new carbon-free energy technologies. They also supplemented their efforts to prevent climate change with a recognition that some degree of climate change was inevitable and society needed to plan for that in ways that would limit its adverse impact. In pursuing all of this, they were able to move forward despite enormous uncertainties. This was a project undertaken at the frontier of human knowledge. All of this has resulted in a powerful global climate change movement that has made enormous progress, as is evidenced by the recent Paris Agreement. Still, obviously, decades of hard work remain. The success of the climate change movement has led us to ask an obvious question. Are there other similar problems out there? And in this context, we adopt a nomenclature from the U.S. Navy that names ships after the first ship of each class. So a Ticonderoga class cruiser is any cruiser that is built the same way the Ticonderoga is. So in our sense, a climate change class problem is any problem that has the similar characteristics. And by that we mean a problem that's largely unrecognized but poses grave threats to humanity that will take decades of sustained, high-level, creative effort to address. As I said at the beginning of this post, we believe that destructive conflict dynamics constitute such a climate change class problem. These dynamics in their own right can lead to incredible suffering, and they are a major obstacle to society's ability to solve other kinds of big problems, like, as I talked about before, infectious disease or economic stagnation. Now, you might say that we're already spending lots of money on conflict, and that's true, but we're spending money to play the same old destructive conflict game. We're spending almost nothing on efforts to change the game through the work of organizations like the United States Institute of Peace. So the big question is, how can this be changed? And we believe that the current state of the conflict and peace-building field is analogous to the state of the climate field in the 70s and 80s. And how can we learn from and repeat their success? That's one of the big questions we want to address as we try to use the format of the massive open online seminar to discuss the big issues on the frontier of the peace and conflict field. In doing this, we're not just calling for more funding for the field, though that would be nice. We have to do this in a way that persuasively answers the concerns of the skeptics and cynics. While kumbaya solutions may be unrealistic, it's also unrealistic to believe that we can't do a whole lot better in the way we deal with a wide range of conflict problems. In order to do this, we've got to increase the utilization of existing knowledge with learning accelerator strategies capable of overcoming the limits of today's business as usual conflict learning. We also need to increase the rate at which new knowledge is generated. The Alliance for Peacebuilding, for example, has been producing a series of publications, Peacebuilding 2.0 and then 3.0 and so forth. We need to do that field-wide, keep pushing the envelope. We also need to expand the scope of the field beyond its core and conflict resolution and peace building to include security, advocacy, the media, and many, many other fields. The only way in which we can deal with these problems is a massively parallel effort involving the full range of human expertise. We also need to think long-term. The conflict problem is a lot like the war on cancer, something that will take decades of sustained effort in the fields of basic research, applied research, and practice to make real progress. None of this, of course, will be possible unless we're able to attract a lot more people to the field, along with the resources needed to support them.
All of this gives rise to a number of questions worth thinking about. First of all, what did climate scientists do right to get the climate change issue as visible as it is? And how can peace and conflict scholars and practitioners copy their successes? And then on the flip side, what did climate scientists do wrong that may have contributed to the climate denier backlash that is currently hampering an effective response to the problem? And how can we in the peace and conflict field avoid such mistakes ourselves?